What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. Now, if you're looking to play one of the most consistent pendulum-based archetypes in the entire game, with access to cards like Psyframe Lord Omega, Beals of the Diabolical Dragons, and all of the Supreme King Dragons, well, let me introduce you to Pendulum Magicians. Pendulum Magicians are a deck comprised primarily of spellcaster-type pendulum monsters. The strength of this deck lies in its consistency, above average card quality, and ability to capitalize on the pendulum mechanic. While the archetype of Pendulum Magicians is quite vast and spans a majority of the Arc V era, for the purposes of this video, we are only going to be focusing on the Pendulum Magicians that are competitively relevant so that we can be as productive as possible. One advantage of Pendulum Magicians is that for being such a strong competitive deck, the deck can also be played on a budget without having to relinquish a majority of the deck's powerful options. While these differences may matter in the context of attending a regional or a YCS, being able to play a competitive deck of this caliber for a fraction of the price of other meta options is a great way to keep up with the competition. Let's start by covering the monster lineup. Be forewarned, Pendulum Magicians can have a lot more card text than normal, but we're going to break everything down piece by piece. Wisdom Eye Magician is an excellent place to start, as it's one of the strongest monsters at the deck's disposal. Most pendulum monsters have a pendulum effect that destroys themselves while in the pendulum zone to grant the player with a wide variety of abilities. Wisdom Eye Magician arguably has the most powerful ability, allowing you to destroy itself while you have another Magician or Performapal card in your other pendulum zone to place a Magician pendulum monster in your pendulum zone except itself. This is powerful for a variety of reasons. First off, because all of the Magicians have abilities that we want to trigger by destroying themselves in the pendulum zone, Wisdom Eye allows us to tutor for whatever Magician we want in our pendulum zone at any given moment. In addition, Wisdom Eye allows us to tutor for any specific high or low scale, allowing us to complete our pendulum scale when aiming to pendulum summon. And finally, since the requirements for this effect are relatively easy to achieve, this makes Wisdom Eye an excellent enabler for other cards in the deck that trigger when a Pendulum Magician is either destroyed or leaves the field. Next up is Double Iris Magician. Similar to Wisdom Eye Magician, Double Iris Magician can destroy itself in the pendulum zone to double any battle damage a targeted dark spellcaster type monster would inflict when battling an opponent's monster. While situational, the main reason you want to use this effect is to trigger Double Iris Magician's monster effect. If Double Iris Magician is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can add one Pendulumgraph card from deck to hand. Remember that for pendulum monsters, their monster effects are applied anytime they're not in the pendulum zone, so all of the destruction effects of the Pendulum Magicians will trigger. Being able to tutor for cards like Star Pendulumgraph and Time Pendulumgraph are essential to the Pendulum Magician strategy. Following in line is Black Fang Magician. Similar to Double Iris Magician, Black Fang Magician has an effect where it halves the attack of any opposing monster and then destroys itself. Upon destruction, Black Fang's monster effect allows you to special summon a dark spellcaster type monster from the graveyard. Now this effect may be a bit counterintuitive because pendulum monsters go to the extra deck a majority of the time. However, Black Fang is useful for reviving Pendulum Magicians used as Xyz materials, or even dark spellcaster type Xyz monsters like Time Star Magician. Purple Poison Magician is next, and is another one of the deck's strongest tools. Purple Poison's pendulum effect reads, once per turn, if a dark spellcaster type monster battles, before damage calculation you can activate this effect. That monster gains 1200 attack until the end of the damage step, then destroy this card. Upon destruction, Purple Poison's monster effect allows you to target and destroy one face-up card on the field. This card is an incredible piece of spot removal, but there's a few things to note about Purple Poison Magician. First, the monster effect can be used during either player's turn, even though the card doesn't explicitly state that it can. Second, if you activate the pendulum effect of Purple Poison Magician, if you choose to activate Purple Poison Magician's destruction effect, targeting the opposing monster that your monster is currently battling, the opponent's monster will be destroyed, but your monster will not get a redeclare attack since all of this is resolving in the damage step. Rounding out the main Pendulum Magician lineup is Harmonizing Magician. Surprisingly, Harmonizing Magician has a very basic pendulum effect where it grants all monsters you control an extra 100 attack and defense for each face-up Pendulum Magician in your extra deck with a different name. But where Harmonizing Magician really shines is in its monster effect. When Harmonizing Magician is pendulum summoned from the hand, you can special summon a Magician Pendulum monster from your deck in defense position except Harmonizing Magician. Now its effects are negated, it's banished when it leaves the field, and you can only use this effect once per turn. But if you haven't already figured it out, we can easily circumvent those downsides by using that special summon monster for an Xyz summon. That way the special summon monster won't be banished. Also note that Harmonizing Magician is a tuner, meaning Harmonizing Magician is very flexible, enabling Synchro, Xyz, and even Link summoning capabilities. Just keep in mind that Harmonizing Magician cannot be special summoned from the extra deck and cannot be used as a fusion, synchro, or Xyz material unless all other materials are Magician Pendulum monsters. Next, we're going to discuss a series of monsters to supplement our main Pendulum Magician lineup, starting with Performapal Skullcrabat Joker, who acts as a Stratos for the archetype, tutoring for any Magician Pendulum monster. Joker synergizes perfectly with the archetype and is definitely going to be a card we'll want to max out on. Another Performapal that complements the deck well is Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer. When Sorcerer is special summoned, you can destroy up to 2 cards you control, and if you do, add Performapal monsters with different names from deck to hand equal to the number of cards destroyed. Unless you include additional Performapals in your build, the only card we're going to be able to search is Joker. However, being able to trigger the destruction effects of the Pendulum Magicians can prove to be invaluable. Plus, having Joker in our hand for our following turn is also incredibly strong. Another strong enabler for destroying the Pendulum Magicians in the Pendulum Zones is Luster Pendulum the Draco Slayer. Luster Pendulum can help generate easy +1s by not only triggering the Pendulum Magicians, but also adding more Pendulum Magicians from deck to hand. Luster may be a bit limiting when it comes to the extra deck options, but its ability to more freely trigger the Pendulum Magician's destruction effects can be well worth the trade-off. OAFDRAGON Magician is also a good inclusion, although not necessarily something we want to max out on. OAFDRAGON's purpose primarily resides in the Pendulum Zone, enabling you to recur face-up Magician Pendulum monsters from your extra deck and adding them to your hand once per turn, assuming you have another Magician card in your other Pendulum Zone. OAFDRAGON is fantastic for adding Harmonizing Magician back to our hand to use for a Pendulum summon at the next opportunity. DRAGONPULSE and Dragon Pit Magician, while being normal Pendulum monsters, can give the deck some much needed spot removal before proceeding with other plays. Assuming we have a Magician card in the other Pendulum Zone, by discarding one Pendulum monster, DRAGONPULSE can destroy a face-up monster, and Dragon Pit can destroy a spell or trap. While good in theory, Pendulum Magicians thrive on having as many combo pieces as possible, and using them just as discard fodder can seem wasteful. But being Pendulum Magicians, DRAGONPULSE and Dragon Pit synergize well with the rest of the deck, and are sometimes teched in depending on the meta. While it isn't technically a Pendulum Magician, ASTROGRAPH Sorcerer is an amazing boon to the deck's capabilities. Its pendulum effect is irrelevant for our purposes, but where ASTROGRAPH Sorcerer really shines is in its monster effect. If a card or cards you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon ASTROGRAPH Sorcerer from your hand, then choose one monster in the graveyard, extra deck, or that is banished and that was destroyed during this turn, and add one monster with the same name from deck to hand. You can already envision the synergies this card has with the main Pendulum Magician lineup, but combine that with an attack power of 2500 and you've got one hell of a beat stick. ASTROGRAPH Sorcerer can also summon Supreme King Zark, but don't focus on this as your main win condition. One card that Pendulum Magician players remain divided on is Mist Valley Apex Avian. When an effect is activated, you can return Apex Avian back to your hand to negate the effect's activation and destroy that card. Being level 7, Apex Avian is capable of being pendulum summoned to the field and providing an extra layer of resilience to your board. However, Apex Avian can also lead to inconsistencies as it provides nothing to the deck outside of the aforementioned application. And wrapping up the monster lineup, you can never go wrong with hand traps. Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, Maxi, all of these are wonderful inclusions depending on how the meta shapes up. When it comes to the extra deck, due to their typing and attribute, Pendulum Magicians have access to some of the strongest extra deck monsters in the game. Cyframe Lord Omega is easily accessible thanks to Harmonizing Magician, Ignister is obvious for any Pendulum-based deck, and since the deck is almost entirely comprised of level 4s, you've got access to the best rank 4s in the game, like Abyss Dweller, Tornado Dragon, and even Utopia the Lightning. But there are some more exclusive extra deck monsters that the deck has access to, such as the Supreme King Dragons. Starving Venom simply requires 2 Dark Pendulum monsters to special summon, and can copy the effect of any monster on the field or in the graveyard. Clearwing just requires Harmonizing and any Dark Pendulum monster, and on summon destroys all face-up monsters the opponent controls. And Rebellion Dragon only requires 2 Dark Pendulum monsters and can attack for a massive amount of damage. Pendulum Magicians also have access to Beels of the Diabolical Dragons, a card that can win games on its own simply because your opponent doesn't have an answer, Enlightenment Paladin, a card that allows you to add any spell card from your graveyard to hand, assuming you used a Magician Pendulum monster as synchro material, and Performapal Trapeze Magician is a card that can completely shut down strategies like Trick Stars, while also providing an easy way for you to OTK your opponent. And last but not least is Time Star Magician, the Pendulum Magician's go-to Xyz monster. Requiring only 2 level 4 Magician Pendulum monsters, Time Star Magician comes packed with 2 incredibly powerful effects. Once per turn, by detaching an Xyz material, you can add to your hand 1 Dark Spellcaster type monster from your deck, graveyard, or face up from the extra deck. Keep in mind this also includes cards like Performapal Skullcrobat Joker. Additionally, once per turn, if a Pendulum monster in either the Monster Zone or Pendulum Zone would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can send 1 Spellcaster type monster from deck to grave instead. Not only does this bestow protection to a majority of the main deck monsters, it also fuels the graveyard with fodder for Black Fang Magician and combos absurdly well with Time Pendulumgraph. Moving on to the spell lineup, since a majority of the deck is occupied with Pendulum Magicians acting as combo pieces, the deck runs a lower than average spell count. However, the spells the deck does run only help bolster the deck's consistency. Starting off with Pendulum Call. By discarding 1 card, Pendulum Call allows us to add 2 Magician Pendulum monsters with different names from deck to hand. In addition to that, until the end of our opponent's next turn after this card resolves, Magician cards in our Pendulum Zones cannot be destroyed by card effects. One downside of this is that you cannot activate Pendulum Call if you activated a Magician Pendulum monster effect this turn, but we can activate their effects after resolving Pendulum Call. And this can cause some neat interactions, such as acquiring Purple Poison's attack boost without losing our scale in the process. Pendulum Call's scale protection also combos very nicely with Time Pendulumgraph as well, but be very wary of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring when playing this card. Star Pendulumgraph is a continuous spell card that bestows protection to all of our spellcaster type monsters from our opponent's spell cards and spell effects that target. Additionally, once per turn, if a face-up Magician Pendulum monster leaves the monster or Pendulum Zone, add 1 Magician Pendulum monster from deck to hand. Star Pendulumgraph synergizes with all of the Pendulum Magician destruction effects and nets us even more advantage. Just keep in mind that this is a mandatory effect. Another powerful spell at this deck's disposal is Duelist Alliance. If there's a card in the Pendulum Zone, we can add any Pendulum monster or Pendulum spell or trap from deck to hand. One thing to note is that Double Iris Magician is always treated as a Pendulum Dragon card, and is searchable via Duelist Alliance for this reason. But beyond that, Duelist Alliance can also fetch cards like Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer, Pendulum Call, Star Pendulumgraph, Time Pendulumgraph, usually whatever you need for the right situation. Wavering Eyes recently became unlimited in the TCG and adds another layer of consistency to the Pendulum Magician archetype. Acting as another enabler to destroy our scales and trigger the Pendulum Magician effects is invaluable, and not to mention that this card can be an absolute blowout in the mirror match. Another spell card you might want to consider is Pot of Desires. Pendulum Magicians don't require any specific combo pieces to function properly, but rather we want to see as many combo pieces as possible, and Pot of Desires allows us to increase our resources. The deck runs multiple copies of all of its main combo pieces, and it's extremely unlikely to banish 3 copies of a single combo piece, so it's definitely worth considering. And finally, wrapping up this video is the only trap card the deck needs to run, Time Pendulum Graph. Searchable via double Iris Magician and Duelist Alliance, once per turn you can target 1 Magician Pendulum monster card in either the Monster Zone or Pendulum Zone, and 1 card your opponent controls, and destroy them. Then, if this effect did not destroy 2 cards, you can send 1 card on the field to the graveyard. Time Pendulum Graph is strong for several reasons. First, it can destroy our Pendulum Magicians and help trigger their effects, but more importantly, if we can manage to protect our Pendulum Magicians with the help of cards like Time Star Magician or Pendulum Call, then not only do we get to maintain our resources, but we get to remove even more of our opponent's resources. Just keep in mind that this last effect doesn't target and doesn't destroy, useful for dealing with powerful, untargetable threats. I really hope you enjoyed this introduction to Pendulum Magicians. If you did, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video really helpful, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.
1, 2, 3,